I grew up in northwest Detroit, and my father worked for the city of Detroit, and I had 5 brothers and sisters, and I originally, after high school, I went to Oakland Community College. My folks, I went to an all-boys Catholic high school, and so did my brothers and sisters. They went to parochial school, so my parents had paid the tuition there, so we didn't have the resources to go out to a college to live. So I went for 2 years to Oakland Community College, and then I left there and looked around. When I went to U of M Dearborn, I think it was only juniors and seniors. It wasn't a 4-year institution, and it was fairly small. I think there were only 3 or 4 buildings. It's not like it is now. And you know, the reputation of the University of Michigan, the academics, you know, I'd always wanted to go to U of M. Couldn't afford to go to Ann Arbor and live there, so after I got out of Oakland Community College, I applied for and got into U of M Dearborn, and that's where I spent the last 2 years and graduated from there. I lived at home. I lived at home with my folks and my brothers and sisters, and drove there. We lived in northwest Detroit, so you know, it was a 15 or 20-minute drive, and I remember it was fairly small. I didn't know anybody there initially, and my major was political science, and when I went there, I did that in addition to working part-time to afford to pay the tuition there, which I think is it was a little cheaper then than it is now. And I enjoyed it. It was very small. It was, in my classes, there were probably no more than 20 people. And so there was a lot of interaction with the other students and with the professors. All of them were very good. I can honestly say that there was one, Bernie Klein, who taught political science, and I think he also worked for the city of Detroit. Coleman Young, I think, was the mayor then, and he worked on his staff. So it was an opportunity to hear from somebody who was teaching political science, who was actually involved in public government. So it's very interesting. I had at least 2 or 3 classes with him. And in fact, then I think I don't know if it was my senior year or my junior year, there was an internship program at U of M Dearborn, and I got placed with Carl Levin, who just retired from the U.S. Senate. He was on the Detroit, it was then called the Common Council, and it was a legislative body for the city of Detroit, and I was an intern for him. He was council president, I believe, and then sometime later he ran for the Senate and was elected and served many terms in the Senate. A student who had to work to pay for the tuition. As I said, my folks couldn't afford to send us to college, so my brothers and sisters, we'd work, get enough money to go to school, and then so you would go to classes and then leave class, and I probably, during the course of my college career, probably had 10 or 15 different jobs. So it was trying to budget your time between working, going to school, and studying.
Yeah. Did you get all A's?
Yes, of course I did. Of course I did. No, unfortunately, I'm sure I didn't get all A's. I honestly don't recall what my grade point was. It was enough that I was able to get into law school. but I honestly can't remember what it was. But I do know it wasn't all A's. Um, political science was an interest. I had an uncle that was on the Wayne County Commission, and I had an uncle who was the Wayne County clerk. In fact, on my marriage license, I think it was issued by my uncle who was the Wayne County clerk at the time. So there was always discussions about politics in my house growing up, and so that was kind of an interest, and so that led me into that area. And then when I graduated, you looked around to see what sounded interesting, what you thought you would like to do, and that kind of led to law school, and then my career here. That was probably the main thing. You would attend, you'd take a full load, and then, as I said, I worked at various jobs. So I would leave school, I would go, for example, I worked for a while at the Detroit Post Office downtown, the afternoon shift. So I'd get off, I'd drive downtown, I'd work till 11 o'clock, get off work, drive home, try to fit some studying in there and do that. But, in addition, there was social activities that the people that were involved in the internship there, I remember we were a fairly good group, and I think the woman's name, as I recall, was Mrs. Graves, that headed up the thing. Very nice lady. And everybody was kind of close, and we do some things together. And I remember when we all finished, we had a party, and so even though I don't want to make it sound like it was a drudgery, it wasn't. You went to school and you still found time to do social activities, and in addition, squeezing in work. So. I really enjoy, the classes with Bernie Klein. I really enjoyed the internship. Mrs. Graves, in fact, I hadn't even thought of her name until just when we were just talking about it. But those were some of my best memories, being involved in the internship program. And then later, my daughter went to the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and graduated from there. My one son graduated from the University of Michigan, Dearborn, and my third son is on the 10-year program. So, but yeah, there were a lot of good things that I remember about it.
Yeah. Is that why did you encourage your children to go to U of M?
I'm sure I did. Yeah. No, I'm sure I did.
Yeah.
My daughter, who is my oldest, I think she had always heard about the University of Michigan growing up, and I think when she graduated, I know she looked at a couple of places, but I think the only place she applied was the University of Michigan. And my son, then he originally went to Western Michigan, and then ended up coming back home and went to U of M Dearborn. And in fact, I think he was involved in student government there and graduated from U of M Dearborn. Back then, I don't recall. I don't recall much in the way of activism, although I suppose people were outside of it. But when I went there, as I said, I think when I first started, it was just juniors and seniors, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, the engineering and business was the big part of the campus. I don't know whether it was through an affiliation with Ford Motor Company, but it was fairly small, and they were all commuters, and so you would see people at school, and then you had some friendships that you would see outside of school as well. But in the diversity part of it, honestly, I can't recall. you know, it was at the time, when I went there, I graduated in 1973, so it was the, you know, the 60s were just ending, and that was all, you know, activism was fairly common, and so I'm sure that there was, but in that setting, with commuters, they'd come to school and go. Well, I know that I occasionally get out. You know, I work for the auto club, and the auto club has their headquarters are not far from the University of Michigan, Dearborn, and so I get over to the University of Michigan. You know, I go by it and I see that, you know, it's grown tremendously since I was there, and you know, I think that it was always you know, I grew up in Detroit, and growing up, that's what people, I shouldn't say that's what people you know, were striving for, but when you talked about colleges, universities, you know, that was always considered to be, you know, the place to go. That's where people wanted to go. You wanted to get you know, a degree because of the academic reputation. It changes. I started, you know, I grew up in Detroit, and then I lived in Detroit until I think 1977, and then I moved out, and then my first home I bought back in Detroit, and I lived in Detroit again for another 8 or 9 years, and including when I was working here, I started working downtown Detroit in 1979. So I've seen a lot of changes even in downtown. When I first started downtown Detroit, it was a thriving downtown. Our original office was across the street from Hudson's, which was the big landmark of the Hudson's stores. And I remember people, you know, bustling downtown. And then there was a period of time that you could walk across Woodward Avenue in the middle of the day without looking to see what the traffic light was, because there were no cars. You didn't have to worry about getting hit by a car. There was just nobody downtown. In the last 7 or 8 years, it's reverted back. You know, there are people downtown. You know, Dan Gilbert has bought 70% of downtown and brought people in. You go out, and there are people on the street. There's a vitality to it. There always was a vitality to it, but the more people adds to that, and so there is a real change. It's the population is nowhere near what it was when I was growing up. I remember when I was in school, and Detroit was the 5th largest city in the U.S. I'm not sure it's the 25th largest city in the U.S. by population now, but it's coming back.
Yeah. So you're optimistic about the future?
Yes, it's got a long way to go. I mean, the concern is the downtown area can't be a separate portion from the rest of Detroit. It's great that downtown Detroit is doing well, and that the area, you know, going up Woodward Avenue and in this immediate area. My wife teaches in the Detroit Public Schools. You have to, you know, it's got to be something that's advantageous for everybody who lives here outside of just the downtown area. So that's going to take some time, but, you know, if you would ask people 5 years ago if downtown would have come back, you would have probably not gotten as many optimistic responses. That's a good question. I think, you know, the fact that there are people in Detroit, students in Detroit, who can't afford to go and live in Ann Arbor. The fact that there is a U of M Dearborn makes that accessible to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to go there and live. I did the same thing. I know what the challenges are. I think you know, the university I know is involved in a lot of different programs to benefit and encourage people in Detroit to attend. You know, as a lawyer, I see the lawsuits involving the University of Michigan, the lawsuit on quotas, and you know, so I think the role of the university is to reflect the people of the area, and I think that they are involved, and you know, I hope they make it accessible to everyone. Enjoy it. It's a, you know, it's really, I don't want to say it's a privilege to go there, but it's, you know, it's one of the top universities in the country, and you really, you know, if you want the quality education, with a wide-ranging scope, you know, that's the place to go.
Mm-hmm.